Adventure Ledger presents Shadows in the Sun, Episode 8. Oliver's heart raced as the prison's cold concrete walls pressed in on him. His breathing was shallow, his mind spinning with the weight of everything. Marco knew. That was the thought that consumed him as he moved through the shadowy corridors. Hector hadn't found the drugs, but he had found enough to stir Marco's suspicions. Oliver's lies were unraveling, and the consequences were coming for him fast. He ducked into a narrow hallway, trying to steady his breath. His meeting with Luis had left a bitter taste in his mouth. Luis had promised him protection, but only if he continued to play this dangerous game. Now, Oliver was tasked with feeding false information to Marco, a task that felt more like walking through a minefield. One wrong step, and he'd be dead. Oliver's thoughts twisted in on themselves. Every decision felt like the wrong one. Working with Luis had seemed like his only option, but now he wondered if he had simply traded one devil for another. Luis was manipulative, always one step ahead, and if Oliver wasn't careful, he'd be chewed up and discarded the moment he outlived his usefulness. His mind buzzed with the memory of Luis's words. Make sure Marco gets the wrong intel. Once Cruz's faction is fully weakened, we'll move in. You want to survive, don't you? Survival. That word had lost its meaning. What did it even mean anymore? Did surviving mean becoming someone he no longer recognized? Oliver wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to focus. He couldn't think about that now. He needed to get through the next few hours alive. Marco was already circling, and if Oliver didn't make a move soon, it would all fall apart. As he reached the yard, the low hum of prisoners moving through their routines filled the air, but there was an underlying tension. Everyone knew something was coming. The prison felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. And Oliver was the one at the center of it all, pulled between Marco's ruthless drive for control and Luis's cold calculations. He spotted Hector near the far wall, talking with a few of Marco's men. Hector's eyes briefly met Oliver's, and there was no mistaking the sharp suspicion there. He knows. Hector didn't trust him, not after their last encounter, and it wouldn't be long before Hector convinced Marco that Oliver was a traitor. With the weight of it all crushing down on him, Oliver moved deeper into the yard, knowing that his time was running out. Oliver's pulse hammered in his ears as he made his way toward Marco's quarters. He had no choice but to confront the man. Luis had made it clear, if Oliver didn't deliver the false information soon, he'd be on his own. But this wasn't just about Luis anymore. Marco was closing in, and Oliver had to stay ahead of him. The corridor felt longer than usual, the air thick with the tension that had been building over the past few days. Oliver knew that each step was bringing him closer to the edge of a precipice. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the charade. As he approached Marco's door, Oliver's mind raced. He had to stay calm, act like nothing was wrong. He knocked, his hand trembling slightly, and the door creaked open. Marco sat behind his desk, his sharp eyes locking onto Oliver the moment he stepped inside. The room was dim, with just a single flickering light illuminating Marco's face. "Matthews," Marco said, his voice steady but edged with suspicion. "You've been distant lately." Oliver forced a small smile, though his heart was pounding. "Just trying to keep my head down, Marco. Things have been tense since the last shipment." Marco didn't respond right away. His gaze lingered on Oliver, dissecting him, waiting for a crack in his armor. The silence was suffocating, and Oliver could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He needed to control the conversation before Marco got too deep into his suspicions. "I've been hearing things," Oliver said, keeping his tone low, as if sharing something sensitive. "Cruz's men are planning a move soon. They're desperate now that the last shipment got through. They're going to try and sabotage your next deal. I figured you should know." Marco's eyes darkened, but he remained still. He was a master at hiding his emotions, but Oliver could see the gears turning in his mind. "And how do you know this?" "I overheard some of Cruz's men talking in the yard," Oliver lied, his throat tightening as the words left his mouth. "They didn't notice me, but it sounded like they're getting ready for something big." For a moment, Marco said nothing, his eyes never leaving Oliver's. The silence stretched on, and Oliver could feel the tension thickening in the room. Had Marco seen through his lie? Finally, Marco leaned back in his chair, a slow smile curling at the edges of his lips. Good. I knew they'd make a move soon. Oliver exhaled, but the tension hadn't lifted. He wasn't safe yet. Marco stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving Oliver's. The tension in the room felt like a rope tightening around Oliver's neck. Had he bought Marco's trust, or was this a trap? "You've done well, Matthews," Marco said, though his tone was unreadable. "But if you're lying to me, I'll know." Oliver nodded quickly, his palms slick with sweat. "I'm not lying. I'm on your side. I just want to survive this place." Marco studied him for another long moment before giving a curt nod. "All right, you've given me something useful. But remember, Oliver, there's no place for traitors here. Keep doing your job, and maybe you'll make it out alive." His smile was cold, calculating. The words hung in the air as Marco turned his back to Oliver, signaling that the conversation was over. Oliver left the room quickly, the weight of what he had just done pressing heavily on his chest. He had fed Marco the false information, just as Luis had asked. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a slow death sentence. Marco was watching him, and now Oliver had no room for mistakes. As he made his way back through the corridors, Oliver's thoughts spiraled. He had just barely kept Marco at bay, but Hector was still out there, waiting for a chance to expose him. And Luis? Luis was playing his own game, one where Oliver was just another piece on the board. He couldn't trust anyone, not anymore. The yard was quieter than usual as Oliver stepped outside. Prisoners moved in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. There was an eerie sense of calm before the storm, as if everyone knew that the balance of power was about to shift again. Oliver's gaze darted across the yard, searching for Hector. He needed to figure out what Hector knew, and whether he was planning to go to Marco. If Hector had any proof of Oliver's betrayal, it would be over in an instant. Marco would kill him without a second thought. He spotted Hector near the far wall, talking to a group of men. Oliver's stomach clenched. Now or never. Taking a deep breath, Oliver started toward him, every step feeling heavier than the last. He had no plan, no idea what he would say, but he couldn't afford to wait any longer. Hector turned as Oliver approached, his eyes narrowing. "Matthews," he said coldly. "What do you want?" Oliver forced a smile, though his heart was pounding. "We need to talk." Hector's eyes were hard, and for a moment, Oliver wasn't sure if this was the right move. Hector had already been suspicious since the shipment, and their last encounter hadn't helped. But Oliver had no choice. He couldn't wait for Hector to make the first move. "What's on your mind, Matthews?" Hector asked, his tone flat, but there was a sharp edge underneath. He gestured for Oliver to follow him to a quieter corner of the yard. Oliver's gut twisted. Hector was setting the stage for something. But what? They moved to a shadowy alcove near the back of the yard, out of earshot from the others. Hector crossed his arms, waiting for Oliver to speak, but the tension between them was suffocating. "I know you're suspicious of me," Oliver said, trying to keep his voice steady, "but I'm on Marco's side. You've seen me working with him. You know that." Hector's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Sure, I've seen you working with him." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "But I've also seen the way you move between Cruz's men and Marco's. You think I haven't noticed? You're playing a dangerous game, Matthews, and I don't like it." Oliver's heart raced. This was it. If Hector pushed too far, if he went to Marco with his suspicions, it would be over. He needed to find a way to divert Hector's attention, make him believe that Oliver was still loyal, or at least too valuable to get rid of. "I'm not playing any games," Oliver said, his voice tense. "I've been feeding Cruz's men false information. They think they can trust me, but I'm working to get Marco the upper hand. You've got it wrong, Hector. I'm trying to help." Hector studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he weighed the truth in Oliver's words. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, and Oliver could feel the tension building in his chest. Would Hector buy it? Finally, Hector sighed, shaking his head. "You better hope you're telling the truth, Matthews, because if you're not, it's your head on the line. I don't trust you, and neither does Marco, but for now, you're still useful." The relief that washed over Oliver was brief. Hector hadn't exposed him, but the threat was still there, looming over him like a storm cloud. He hadn't escaped the noose yet. Hector turned to leave, his voice trailing behind him. "Watch your back, Matthews. You're running out of time." Oliver swallowed hard, his heart still pounding. The clock was ticking down faster than ever. Oliver's hands were still shaking as he watched Hector disappear into the shadows. The encounter had left him rattled, the cold reminder that he was playing a game with no winners. Hector hadn't gone to Marco yet, but Oliver knew it was only a matter of time. He was running out of moves. As he walked back toward the common area, Oliver felt a sudden surge of nausea. His mind raced with the weight of everything he'd done. The lies, the manipulation, the deals with devils like Luis. It all weighed on him like an anchor dragging him into darkness. How had it come to this? He hadn't come to Bolivia to get involved in drug operations or prison politics. He had been searching for something, adventure maybe, or a way to escape the monotony of his old life. But now, standing in the middle of San Sebastián, he realized he had only escaped into a deeper trap. There was no adventure here, only survival. And surviving here had cost him more than he could ever have imagined. Oliver found a quiet corner of the yard and leaned against the wall, his mind reeling. Luis's plan was still in motion, but the closer it got to succeeding, the more Oliver realized how little control he had. He was a pawn, nothing more. Luis had used him to manipulate Marco, and Marco would kill him the moment he figured out the truth. Was this the life he wanted? A life of deception, constantly looking over his shoulder, trapped between two power-hungry forces that would chew him up and spit him out the moment he became inconvenient? The answer was obvious. No, this wasn't what he wanted, but what choice did he have? There was no way out, not unless he delivered on Luis's plan. And even then, Luis might just decide to cut him loose. Oliver closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He was at the breaking point. He had to decide, once and for all, how far he was willing to go to survive. But the truth was, every choice felt like a trap, and no matter which way he turned, it led to the same thing: betrayal. The night was closing in, the shadows of the prison growing longer. Oliver stood up, steeling himself. He had to keep moving, had to play this out until the end, no matter how much it cost him. The air inside San Sebastián felt thick with tension as night fell. Oliver could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, each step growing heavier as he approached the point of no return. Luis's final instructions rang in his ears. He had to deliver false intel to Marco, an easy lie that would send Marco's men into a trap. But now, standing in the middle of the prison, every part of him screamed that he was walking into something far worse than a trap. He was being played by everyone. As he crossed the yard, two of Marco's men suddenly appeared, blocking his path. His heart leaped into his throat, panic surging through him. They weren't here to talk. "Marco wants to see you," one of them said, his tone flat and cold. Oliver's pulse quickened. This was it. Marco had figured it out. Luis's plan had gone wrong, or maybe Hector had finally gotten to Marco. Either way, there was no way out now. He nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral, but inside, every instinct was screaming at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. Not in San Sebastián. They led him down a long, dimly lit hallway, deeper into the bowels of the prison. Oliver's mind raced, every footstep echoing with the certainty that this was the end. The prison walls seemed to close in on him, suffocating, as if the very building was conspiring against him. The guards didn't even look at him as he passed. They already knew what was coming. Finally, they stopped in front of a heavy, rusted door. One of Marco's men knocked twice, and the door creaked open. Inside, Marco stood waiting, his expression cold, his arms crossed. "Matthews," Marco said, his voice dangerously soft. "I think it's time we had a little chat." Oliver swallowed hard, his pulse racing as Marco's men shoved him into the room. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing like a death sentence. There was no escape now. The lies had caught up with him, and Marco wasn't here to listen. He was here to finish this. Marco stepped closer, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "You've been playing both sides, haven't you?" Oliver opened his mouth, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. The truth had finally caught up with him.
This is the end of the episode. Thank you for listening. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel and check out our other stories. You can find the link to the next episode in the description below. What do you think about this episode? Let us know in the comment section below.